I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, next month's Palestinian Municipal Elections, which are the focus of a great deal of attention in diplomatic circles around the world, certainly in the State of Israel. The elections will take place on October 8th in both the West Bank and in Gaza. Of course, the last time there were elections in Gaza, Hamas won was, to many, a surprise victory, and threw Fatah out of the Strip and sometimes off the roofs of buildings. The West Bank election was in 2006, which is why many joke that Mahmoud Abbas is in the 10th year of a 4-year term. And now the question is, which group is likely to win in Gaza and on the West Bank? Right now, Hamas and Fatah have divided the Palestinian world. Hamas ruling Gaza, Fatah governing the West Bank. We recently spoke with American diplomat Elliot Abrams, who expressed concern that Hamas might now win in both Gaza and the West Bank, development which would have sharp repercussions throughout the Arab world and which would make peace negotiations with Israel infinitely more problematic. But Elliot Abrams is not the only voice offering predictions. Another highly esteemed Middle East analyst and journalist with the Times of Israel, Avi Issacharoff, sees things a bit differently. And Avi is on our JBS phones now from Israel. Avi, thank you so much for joining us once again on JBS.
Thank you, Mark.
By the way, Avi, you may not know, but as of this past weekend, we are now streaming the JBS channel live online in Israel, so Israelis and Jews around the world will be able to see you on JBS and hear your analysis of the upcoming Palestinian elections. Be aware you have a larger audience now, Avi.
Mazel tov, and I'll think twice before I'm going to say something stupid. But at the end, I will say something.
I know you will. All right, Avi, you heard in the open that Elliot Abrams is concerned that Hamas might win in both Gaza and the West Bank. How do you expect the Palestinian elections to turn out?
Well, right now, this is the million-dollar question that most of us, the Middle East affairs analysts, are dealing with. Yes, there were some alarm signs, meaning that we were fearing that Hamas might win in the West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. But I think that in the last 10 days, maybe even 2 weeks, there's some signs that are saying that we can cool a bit, and maybe we were too much in panic. And at the end of the day, even if Hamas will have some achievements, they will be very limited in the West Bank, while in Gaza, we might be witnessing a big surprise. We might be witnessing a good, positive surprise this time, that maybe, just maybe, Fatah is going to win in some of the big cities of the Gaza Strip, meaning Gaza itself, Gaza City, Khan Yunis, Rafah, Deir el-Balah. These are the 4 cities that there's a fair chance today that Fatah is going to win, and maybe if it's not going to be kind of a huge victory, maybe they're going to get almost equal to Hamas. That's going to be a big blow to Hamas, especially while he's saying that people love Hamas in Gaza Strip, people care about Hamas, and people would like Hamas to continue with what they call the resistance strategy. With the West Bank, I must say, I was last week in Ramallah. I was presented with some numbers, some more positive signs that are saying that already now, a few weeks before the elections taking place, we know that Fatah had assured that it will win at least 35% out of the seats in the West Bank. Before the election started, it made sure through some kind of a technical process that they have in their pocket 35%, meaning they don't need to win much more in order to get the majority.
Mm-hmm.
So then again, it's not going to be the big green because of Hamas's colors. It's not going to be the big green tsunami that we had witnessed in 2006 and before that, 2005 in the municipality election.
It's interesting for us to watch how the Palestinian world has been divided between Fatah and Hamas. And many people argue, Avi, that as long as this division exists, it's very hard for Israel, the West, the world, to deal with the Palestinian issue as a whole. As you look at the fact that there may be some wins in Gaza by Fatah, maybe there are going to be some wins on the West Bank for Hamas. Can you explain to us, how does this impact the way in which Palestinians relate to one another and how we can view the Palestinian world as a whole?
Well, it's on a very symbolic level, meaning there's no real significance for that on the ground. Yes, maybe some municipalities in Gaza will be under the control of Fatah, maybe. Maybe some of the municipalities in the West Bank, just like in Nablus, but we know that the mayor that is going to be elected is probably going to be Adli Aish, who's a Hamas member, but he's in a kind of an agreement with Fatah that they will run together in Nablus. But at the end of the day, don't be mistaken. It doesn't mean that we will see reconciliation on the ground. It doesn't mean that we will see some unification of Gaza and the West Bank or between Hamas and Fatah. This is not the case. Yes, it is the first time that for the last 10 years that we're going to have some elections in both places at the same time, in Gaza and in the West Bank. But still, I can promise you, Mark, that the day after the elections, we're not going to see the Palestinian Authority taking control over Gaza, even if they're going to win a huge victory for Fatah in Gaza, and the opposite way around, meaning that even if Hamas is going to win a huge victory in the West Bank, it doesn't mean that Hamas is going to take over the West Bank. Mm-hmm. Still, we're going to have this division, divided between the fragmentation between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip.
Very interesting, Avi. Explain to us also the way in which Hamas and Fatah are really very different. And I want you to discuss it in terms of, first, how do each of them view the other? And what do you consider to be the major distinction between Hamas and Fatah? But begin by talking about, how does Hamas look at Fatah? How does Fatah look at Hamas?
Well, I'm trying to keep it for the bottom line, because this is a huge story, of course. This is the big split between Gaza and the West Bank, between Fatah and Hamas, between the national aspirations and the religious aspirations. This is a matter of ideology. This is a matter of culture or background, whatever. It's huge. This is a kind of story that divided the Palestinian people into two. So, when you ask a Fatah member what does he think about Hamas, officially, on the record, he would say, this is my brother, my akhi in Arabic. But off the record, they treat Hamas as a group of crazy radicals that they should be in jail, bottom line. Mm-hmm. While Hamas is treating Fatah or talking about Fatah, then again, not officially, off the record, as a group of traitors, as a group of collaborators with the state of Israel that should be punished for that. Now, at the end of the day, you see that on the ground. Fatah and the Palestinian Authority arrest every month hundreds of people that are affiliated with Hamas or Islamic Jihad. The same happens with Hamas, only on a smaller scale, meaning Hamas arrests in Gaza tens of members of Fatah. Why? Because they fear that the other group is going to try to go for another coup, just like what happened in 2007. They think that the biggest lesson that was learned by Fatah and by the Palestinian Authority, and especially by Mahmoud Abbas himself, is that the biggest threat for his existence, for his regime, is not from the state of Israel, but it's from Hamas. Mm-hmm. And this is why, after the coup of June 2007, what we had witnessed in the West Bank is that they arrested hundreds of members of Hamas, taking the weapons and making sure that there will be no existential threat for the Palestinian Authority from Hamas.
Interesting. Very interesting. By the way, Avi, is Hamas Islamist? And I ask this because you wrote a superb piece in the Times of Israel about these upcoming elections, and you use the term from Mahmoud Abbas's perspective. Talk about whether Hamas is Islamic now in the sense that that term is a term of art that refers to those who are part of the radical or extreme Muslim community, like ISIS or Al-Qaeda, involved in terrorism. Is Hamas an Islamist group?
It is an Islamic group. It's definitely an Islamic group, but there's all kinds of Islamic groups. Even among the Muslim Brotherhood supporters, a different kind of Muslim Brotherhood, and this is something that needs to be said. This is not ISIS. This is not Jabhat al-Nusra. This is not Al-Qaeda. Hamas are different. They are radicals, but they're not as radical as ISIS and Al-Qaeda, meaning they are the ones that are saying, yes, we want to have an Islamic state or Islamic caliphate, but we're not going to slaughter our people and kill our brothers, the Muslims, just in order to get that. We need to convince them to become better Muslims. We need to be able to do it in a natural way, in a political way, but not through forcing them to wear a hijab, but to convince them, for example, to wear a hijab, the women, I mean. So Hamas is different if you compare them to ISIS. They are much more radical, they are much more religious comparing to Fatah, but they're less radical, less religious comparing to Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc.
Very interesting. I assume you do consider Hamas to be a terrorist organization, correct?
I do.
You do not consider Fatah to be a terrorist organization?
No, I don't think that Fatah is a terrorist organization for the simple fact that the State of Israel doesn't consider Fatah a terrorist organization, and the State of Israel is conducting every day meetings, talks with Fatah officials in order to coordinate security issues, in order to coordinate economic issues. So, if my country doesn't consider Fatah as a terrorist organization, why should I do that?
Will there be any repercussions at all for the State of Israel if the elections go one way or the other, Avi?
I think it's going to be more on the political level, meaning it's not going to affect the State of Israel or even the situation on the ground between Israel and the Palestinian territories. Let's imagine for just 1 second that Hamas will take over the West Bank municipality elections. It doesn't mean that there's going to be a change of policy. It means that the mayor that is in charge of the garbage and the water and the sewage, etc., would be a Hamas member, and he will need to coordinate with some Israeli officials, but not more than that. I think that at the end of the day, it's going to affect the political level. And what do I mean about that? If there's going to be a Hamas huge victory in the West Bank, that will be the best proof for the right-wing side of the map in Israel to say, you see, we said that there's no partner, we said that all Palestinians are in support of Hamas, and this is the proof for that. On the other hand, if Fatah is going to win the West Bank, and even in Gaza, then the left-wingers will say, you see, we said that there's a partner, we said that not everyone is Hamas, and we said that they're looking to reach peace with the State of Israel. So I think that both sides in the Israeli political arena are going to use the results of the elections in order to strengthen what they have to say to the Israeli people.
Very interesting. By the way, Avi, how long have you been a journalist?
Actually, not too long, only almost 17 years, since the beginning of 2000.
Okay. You've written an awful lot, and you've published an awful lot on what is called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There have been times when pieces you've written seem to indicate you are an optimist, that you believe some kind of reconciliation, some kind of peace agreement can be reached between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Do I read you correctly?
I think that was in the past, not anymore.
Interesting. By the way, I just saw a piece you wrote in 2015. It was sent to me, and I was fascinated by it. You were, I believe in that piece, in some way bemoaning the fact that you felt the Israeli government was not doing enough, that Benjamin Netanyahu was not doing enough. When you say in the past, but not anymore, at what point do you feel you became less optimistic, and why?
I think that in the last few months, even years, I'm becoming less and less optimistic. I think that the probability of two-state solution is getting away from us and getting far and far and far from us. I think that it's not realistic to discuss this in the next following months. You know, if you look around us, if you look at the Israeli side, if you look at the Palestinian side, I think that both are responsible and blamed for the lack of progress, lack of even a political process going on between the two states or the two people. And at the end of the day, that every day that passes by with no peace agreement, the two-state solution is getting far and far away from us. And some other issues are coming more and more realistic, meaning keeping the status quo as is. And then at the end of the day, let's say in 5 years, in 10 years, we will need to reconsider what we have on the ground. I mean, the status quo won't remain like that forever and ever. Either that is going to see some kind of an explosion, a violent one from the Palestinian side, or some international pressure on the state of Israel to agree to give the Palestinians full rights. And if it's not going to be that case, then we're going to be blamed by the international community of becoming an apartheid state. So this is why I felt in the past that we need to go forward. We need to make some kind of a real process in order to reach a peace agreement. I fear that it's too late. We don't have Palestinian leadership that is capable today in delivering, in reaching a two-state solution. I think that the future Palestinian leadership would be much more radical and violent, if we can mention the name of Marwan Barghouti as an example. And I fear that the current leadership in Israel is not too enthusiastic about reaching a peace agreement with the Palestinians.
Tell me how you're critical. In what area are you critical of Israel or the Israeli administration or of Prime Minister Netanyahu? I understand, like many of us can understand, why you describe the Palestinian leadership as you do. I am always fascinated when somebody says to me, neither side seems to want peace. What bothers you about the Israeli position which you feel could be realistically different?
Well, I believe that, if you look at the long-term steps that can be made, I think that, continuing to hold all of the West Bank, Judah and Samaria, is not going to pay the interest of the state of Israel. And this is why I think that building outside of the settlement blocks is not serving the interest of the state of Israel. I'm not talking about East Jerusalem. I'm not talking about the settlement blocks. I'm talking about the lone settlements, the isolated settlements, that at the end of the day, if there will be two-state solution, they will be evacuated. Or some plan that they will be evacuated. And I don't think that building over there really serves the interest of the state of Israel. This is why I think that, an Israeli decision should have been taken in order to keep the two-state solution alive, to remain of building outside of the settlement block. This is for the long run. For the short term, I think that there should be some more economic measures to help the Palestinians. And I even suspect that a group of prisoners that Israel promised to release back in 2014, what the Palestinians are calling or referring as the fourth round, we talk about 30 prisoners that were arrested before 1993, before the Oslo Agreement, that Israel should have released them as a kind of a gesture to show that it means business. But then again, we're talking about a completely different reality today. When you understand that Mahmoud Abbas is not really capable of changing the Palestinian public and really demanding huge concessions from the Palestinian public, and Netanyahu has some other issues on his agenda. And Netanyahu is taking care of the Middle East and making sure that our relations with Jordan and Egypt and Saudi Arabia would be positive. And he doesn't see any signs of urgency to go forward in the peace negotiations with the Palestinians.
I understand. By the way, neither do you, Avi. You see nothing at the moment that gives you hope inside the Palestinian community.
No, Mark, what you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, this is one of the biggest problems that needs to be discussed.
Yes.
Even if tomorrow morning we will see Netanyahu and Abbas meeting not in Moscow, but in Washington, D.C., or in Jerusalem, or in Ramallah, kissing and hugging and signing a peace agreement, we still have this huge, major problem, which is called Gaza Strip. Do we really believe, do we think that the day after the signing of a peace agreement between Abbas and Netanyahu, and it's not going to happen, but let's assume for just 1 second that it will happen. Do we really think that Hamas is going to get so enthusiastic that it will say, oh, how lovely it is that we have a peace now with Israel, please, the Palestinian Authority, come and take over the Gaza Strip? This is not going to be the case. And the opposite way around, meaning that the minute that we will see real negotiations between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, I can promise you that Hamas will do everything possible, including using rockets, violence, suicide attacks, etc., in order to prevent Palestinian Authority and Israel from reaching a peace agreement.
I find your comments, first of all, very insightful, but also so fascinating. You know, I've argued on JBS, to be a Jew always means to maintain a sense of hope and always striving for peace. Even if it looks bleak, the Jew must continue to strive for some kind of peaceful resolution with the Palestinians. And at the same time, I don't want to be unrealistic. And what you said a moment ago, just in my mind, encapsulates the dilemma the feeling, thinking Jew is in. Because what you said was, if tomorrow Abbas and Netanyahu signed an agreement, and then you went on to talk about the problems that would still exist with Gaza, but you said it this way, Avi, if Abbas and Netanyahu signed an agreement, and then you said, it isn't going to happen. And that seems to me the overarching reality, which I feel many very well-meaning Americans and liberals who have a questionable view about Israeli policy, I don't think they understand that you and Israeli can say at the same time, we want to think about as if it's a chess game. We want to know how the pieces should be played if we ever were to sign a peace agreement with Abbas. And by the way, it isn't going to happen. You as an Israeli can live with both understandings at the same time. Do you appreciate that from afar? Americans are not, it's harder for Americans to grasp that reality. We want it one way or the other. You live with the ambivalence and the kind of internal contradictions. Speak to that for me for a moment.
This is the Middle East. This is, our daily life here with, I've said it so many times, but in order to understand how complex it is, the Middle East, our conflict with the Palestinians, everyone that comes here and deals with the Palestinians and the Israelis, and even different reporters that are coming from all over the world, foreign reporters, what I'm trying to say to them is that, listen, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not about black and white. It's about 50 shades of gray. This is the story, this is the case, this is what you need to understand. It's not as simple as you think. There's not good and bad. There are so many different shades here in order, the nuances, the shade, everything, and it's very difficult to understand.
I want to make sure I understand you. Am I wrong to see more light and good in the Israeli position and more problematic, even darkness inside the Palestinian world? For me, it's not a question of, I agree that it's all gray, but it's shades of gray that, as a gradient, become much whiter as you get to Israel. Am I being inappropriately romantic, or do you agree with me?
I do agree with you. I think that, yes, look, I'm an Israeli. I cannot hide that. I'm a Zionist. I cannot hide that. I'm pro-Israel, so, of course, I guess that if you ask the average Palestinian, even the pragmatists among them, or the moderates, they would say, well, it's more black on the Israeli side, while it's more white on the Palestinian one. So me as an Israeli, yes, what can I say? I do think that there are more problems right now with the Palestinian side. And the biggest problem is that at the end of the day, they are not, even among us there's this problem, but I think that we did not support terror. When something happened bad with the Wabsheh family, the terrorist attack against Muslims, against Palestinians, we went against it with all power.
Of course.
And I think that still the Palestinian society needs to go against violence and against terror.
Beautifully said. All right, before I let you go, Avi, are you watching the American elections?
Yes, I do.
So what's your sense of how...
It's very difficult to ignore them,
Yes. What's your sense of how Israelis are viewing Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? In a minute or so, how would you summarize that?
Well, I would surprise you by saying that most of the Israelis, or the average Israeli, is not really looking carefully at what is happening on the elections on the American side. I think that we have enough of problems and headaches on our own.
Yes.
But let's say that the journalists or some of the Israeli people do follow it. I personally don't get it. I didn't get the whole Trump show. But this is me personally, and I think that most of the people here in Israel look at Trump and do not really understand who he is. I doubt if many of the Americans understand who he is and what he wants. I think that there's a gap here between what we know of the man and what he really is, and I think that this is part of my fear, meaning I don't know his policy, I don't know what he thinks about the Middle East, or the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, or Iran, or Iraq. I don't know if it's part of his campaign for the election, or is it really his thoughts.
By the way, you're right. These are some of the most confusing, perplexing American elections we have seen, perhaps in modern history. Avi, you do fabulous work. Continue to write and think and express yourself. And I can't thank you enough for always giving time to me and JBS audience. Remember now, you can watch us in Israel, Avi, so every now and then take a peek, all right?
All right.
You be well. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. The thoughts of Avi Issacharoff, who, of course, is a journalist, a brilliant journalist with the Times of Israel. The elections, Palestinian elections, are October 8th. They're municipal. It'll be interesting to see to what extent either Hamas or Fatah do surprisingly well in the other's territory. Fatah in Gaza and Hamas in the West Bank. We, of course, will stay on top of the story. My thanks, as always, to our director, Sloan Copeland, production coordinator, Serge Goldberg, who's back from vacation. You look wonderful, Serge. Thanks to editor Dennis Golan, to JBS's associate director, Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. It's wonderful to be back after the Labor Day weekend and to begin a new season together with you. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.